Do a review, Lekutei Sichas in Chelek Yud Zayin, volume 17, the fourth sicha of the Parshas Vayikra. In this sicha, the Rebbe explains a machloikes between the Rebbe and the Rabbanon in Menachos, in two places in Menachos, whether when you bring a korban eitzim, according to the Rabbanon, the korban which is brought of wood does not require any of the usual things that come with a korban, such as kimitza, such as shemen, levoino, all the additives that come to another korban. But Rebbe holds no, that this is a regular korban. The Rebbe explains, since we learn it out from the word korban, according to Rebbe is very literal. A korban means a korban, 100% korban. The Rebbe will go through every order, every seder of the 6 dorim in the Talmud, and the Rebbe will show in each one of them Rebbe's view to take this simple literal meaning before going, and those who disagree, the Rabbanan and others, some cases, they don't take so literally. That's the basis for their machloikes, because Rebbe says the person calls it a korban, it must mean 100% korban, just like an other korban. You have to have these extras. So eitzim, if that's a korban, then that has to have all the extras as well. But the Rebbe also starts off b'chlal by explaining whether you can bring the korban eitzim. It seems like if it's like a korban, it's brought down in the Teres Kohanim, that you cannot bring it in partnership. And the question is, we know that there was a korban eitzim that the Gemara brings down, that the families brought down. We'll see all in the sicha. It's a very lomdish sicha, and we'll go step by step. Vayikra Daled Aleph. So from Posik, the Nefesh Kisakriv Korban Mincha. So the Posik uses the Lashon of a Korban Mincha. So that means that we're talking about an individual bringing a Korban Nedova, and instead of saying Kisakriv Mincha and not calling it a Korban V'goymer, Unit Kisakriv Mincha, the Torah calls it a Korban. So let it man up in Teres Kohanim. So in the Teres Kohanim, they learn from this pasuk as a yochid, that as an individual, we're talking about nefesh, an individual bringing a gift, can menadev zayin oich, also can gift levoino yayin, the frankincense, the levoino, and the wine, also the shemen, oil, because they're all part of the korban. So since the nefesh brings a korban, he brings everything. He can offer as a nedova also those things that kumen zusammen mit dem korban, and also the other things. Now, further we learn out un oich eitzim hayochid misnadev eitzim. Also, an individual can go ahead and bring wood. The normal wood that you brought in the mizbeach was brought from the funds of the community so that they can burn the korbanos on them. But if a individual wants to bring eitzim, he can bring the eitzim. As we'll see later on, the 2 extra shnei gizrei eitzim that they put over there, that was brought also from the nedam. The bottom line is that we're learning from this pasuk, from the pasuk by a mincha, by a korban mincha, which it talks about an individual bringing a mincha of flour. Mincha is the flour offering, a meal offering. And the Torah calls it also a korban. So that means that an individual can bring all the other things that are associated with the korban. He can bring the levoina, the yayin, and also the wood. Our main discussion over here is going to be about the wood. So, since we're saying that an individual can bring wood, and it is just like a korban, the din is that a gift korban mincha, if a person wants to bring an offering of soilus, of mincha, cannot bring in a partnership. It has to bring only individual. So we're going to learn if a person wants to bring eitzim, we're going to learn the Teres Kahanim that he cannot bring it together with a partnership with somebody else, can only bring it by himself, just like the Korban Mincha can only be by himself. Weiter steht in Teres Kahanim, further it states in Teres Kahanim, Kishem she'ein shnayim meviim mincha, nedava, just like two people cannot bring together as partnership a mincha, a korban, a meal offering of soilus. They cannot bring it as a gift together. Kach ein meviim, they can also not bring lo yayin, lo levoina, lo eitzim. So all these things are also included in the korban, as we learned out. So the wine and the levoina, and also the wood, says the Teres Kahanim, cannot be brought in partnership. Each one has to bring it themselves. Okay. So the question is, the problem is we find that a korban eitzim was brought in partnership. Darf man verstehen. So we need to understand. We find that there was a offering of wood that was brought in partnership, which is what the korban eitzim with the 9 mishpachas, for the 10 mishpachas. There was a korban eitzim that was brought by the 9 families. What's the story with the 9 families? So the Mishnah zogt in Tainis, this is in the Gemara in Tainis, the Mishnah in Tainis. The Mishnah says over there, the Mishnah quotes, Zman atzei hakahanim, v'ha'om tishachulu, the days of the wood that the kahanim and the people brought, that were designated that they brought, were 9. There were 9 periods in which there was wood by the kahanim, by the people. What does it mean? Is the Gemara Masber. Over there, the Gemara explains what it means. That when the people of the exile went up to Eretz Yisrael, so they did not find any wood in the storage place where they used to keep the wood. So these 9 families stood up and they gifted Mishalahem of their own. So therefore, the prophets that were amongst them made this condition. Even if the storage place where they kept the wood is going to be full with wood, they should bring from their own. They should be the ones that have the privilege to bring the wood to the Mizbeach. Shenemar, and the Gemara brings a pasuk. In the pasuk it says, so we threw a lotteries about this korban eitzim that they had, and who participated, the Kohanim, the Levim, Va'om. Those are the ones that brought the original time. To bring to the house of our God, to the house of our fathers, for per period that are prepared, shona b'shona, every year by year, to bring this as a fire on the mizbeach of our God, as written in the Torah. So there is a pasuk actually to support. The Gemara brings down this idea. These were the 9 times that these different families, the ones that bought it, they had the right to bring, even if there was wood, they brought wood for the Mizbeach. Now, these things look like the families brought these wood together. It's not like an individual brought a gift like we're talking about. If we're saying that we're not allowed to have a partnership in the Korban Eitzim like we learn in the Teres Kahanim on the pasuk over here, so how is it? Was from Pashtus Hemshech HaSipur, simply in the flow of the story, pasuk and the verse, the Mishnah is mashma. It seems, it appears, as das is gebracht geworden von den Bnei HaMishpacha. This was brought on the family members zusammen, together, als Shutzitziker Korban von der Mishpacha. This was brought as a partnership. Korban, the families brought. These were all families that were bringing together. How could you bring a korban eitzim together when we just learned that you can't bring a korban? It's like a mincha, just like a mincha is not brought together. You can't bring a korban eitzim together. But the Rebbe says in Beis, well, you can become a very simple answer. These are two separate kind of korban eitzim. In our pasuk, we're talking about just a person donating wood and burns it on the mizbeach. But over there, we're talking about wood, not that you just burn separately as a korban on the mizbeach. Over there, we're talking about wood that was used for the others korbanos, just so that there is fire to use as korban. Those were the eitzim that brought over there. And if it's a korban like in our Parteres Kohanim, over there you can't bring in a partnership because it's a korban mincha. But to bring the wood that needs to be there for the fire, for the mizbeach, for the other korbanos, okay, there's no problem. That's not a korban. Base. The pashtus what man gekent for answer. Simply, you could have answered as the din for nidvos eitzim and teres kohanim, that the law of the nidvos eitzim that we talk about in the teres kohanim, red wegen an ander su korban with the korban eitzim that talks about a different category of a korban than the korban eitzim, but state by zman atzia kohanim b'hom, that is written when we talk about the special times that the kohanim and the people had their time that they brought the eitzim. It's a different kind of korban. In Teres kohanim retzich, in Teres kohanim it's talking about vegna korban eitzim from hayochid. Over there it talks about a sacrifice of wood that comes from an individual. With the loshon in Teres kohanim, as the Teres kohanim says, hayochid misnadev, quoted before, hayochid misnadev eitzim. So we're talking about a special for an individual. They are brought as a korban on the mizbech. And over there we have the halacha. As mekeres nit bringen b'shutfus, you can't bring it in partnership. But the time that we talk about Masechta Tainis, the special times that were given for the wood, for the karm, for the test mishpachas, from the 9 families, that nit wegen eitzim. It's not talking about wood, that the wood was brought. The wood is the korban. But wegen eitzim l'maracha, we're talking about wood for the arrangement, for the mizbech, for the fire there. They're stating the Braisa, Canal, as it says in the Braisa, as we said earlier, they didn't find wood in the storage place for the wood, as the Torah says you need wood. This haste. The eitzim was not gedarft. Torah says you need wood. What kind of wood that you needed on this bech should be the arrangement. Should be fire on which to offer the korbanos. On the eitzim and that kind of wood can be brought in partnership. Especially, there's no problem bringing that wood in partnership as ma'odoch. You anyways had to give it over to the community. Before, the wood that you put in the marocha needs to be coming from the community. So even if an individual brings it, you have to first give it over to the tzibur. Before you will do the communal sacrifices, that wood has to belong to the tzibur as well. As it says in the Tosefta. So basically, we're answering two separate. Here we're talking about wood as a korban. Over there, and this cannot come in partnership. Over there, we're talking wood as arrangement of the fire that is on the mizbech. That can be partnership, and not only that, it has to be given over first to the tzibur before it's actually put on the mizbech. So the korban is tzibur. This communal sacrifice should have communal wood. But the Rebbe says no. If you look this halacha, you look at the way it's in the Gemara and Gemara Menachos, the Gemara seems to connect the korban eitzim that was brought by the 9 families that we learn in Gemara Tainis to the gift of the eitzim, which we learn from our pasuk, because that's the same way in the Gemara we have the same thing over there. the reason we need the Teres Kahanim, because the Teres Kahanim says befedish that you don't bring it as a communal, you can bring it in partnership, the korban eitzim. But the other part, as we'll see now. So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara brings down the machlokes over there between the Rabban and the Rebbe. So why we still need explanation? Because the mlimut fun misnadvin eitzim, we say that you can bring a gift of eitzim, which is over here. We're learning from the pasuk over here. But the Gemara aplukta, the Gemara brings a disagreement about this wood. What kind of a korban is it? Is it a korban like a regular korban that would need the levoina? Would it need also the shemen, the eitzim, or it's not? Does it need kmitza? So the Gemara brings up, look, korban. The fact that the Torah says korban, it doesn't say that you bring nefesh, that'll bring a mincha. Torah says nefesh kisakriv, not mincha, but kisakriv korban. From the word korban, the extra word korban is malamed shem misnadvim eitzim. So this teaches us that people can make a gift if they want. They can give wood as a gift, because everything that comes along, we're calling this flower, we're calling it the korban, which means everything that comes along with it. Also, the wood can be brought. So malamed is not eitzim. The Gemara says, we know an individual can bring a korban, but who says that eitzim abachlal a korban? Maybe there's no such thing as a korban eitzim. So the Gemara brings down the pasuk, this pasuk that we quoted from the Gemara in Tainis with regards to the 9 families. The Gemara says like this: that the pasuk says that we put lotteries on the korban eitzim. The Gemara is definitely connecting. This is in the words of the Chachamim, the Tanakama, that the Gemara is connecting this idea that you bring eitzim to the pasuk that we brought down over there before for the nidava that they brought over there. Okay. The Gemara brings down the Rebbe Yomer. So that's it. But the Rebbe says, no, it's not just eitzim. Rabbi Yomer eitzim korban heim, there are full korban. Tu'unim melech, you got to salt them. U'tu'unim hagosha, you got to bring them to the mizbech. Just like every korban, you have to bring it to the mizbech, to hagosha. One of them is the Gemara Mamshich. The Gemara further continues. So this is in the Braise over there. So the Braise itself says that there are korban that would need melech and hagosha Rebbe. The Gemara adds to the Braise. Amar Rove says Rebbe. Not only does it need melech and hagosha, turim kimitza, they need kimitza. And Amar Papa l'divrei Rebbe eitzim tzvichin eitzim. The wood would need other eitzim because they're a korban. Just like a regular korban needs eitzim, they would need eitzim too. So here we have a machlokes between the Gemara quotes the machlokes, the Rebbe quotes the machlokes from the Gemara between the Rebbe and the Chachamim, which is quoted twice in the Gemara Menachos, 2 different places, that whether it's just a korban, according to the Tanakama, we learn it out, it's a korban eitzim, but it's not a real korban. According to Rebbe, it's a real korban. You need salt, you need hagosha, and you need kmitza, and you need eitzim for the eitzim. Okay. So the rest is manavshach. So here we connecting the two. So this pasuk korban eitzim is der selber inyan with der din from misnad bin eitzim. It's the same din. So this is the eitzim. They were talking over there. Also, they were bringing eitzim as a korban, which actually makes sense that is what it's talking about. Not like before we were trying to say, over there it wasn't a korban eitzim, over there it was just wood for the marach. But if we should say that is actually the din of misnabed and eitzim, so then you can't bring it b'shutfas, like the Teres Kahanim we quoted. But the Rebbe adds, it's actually mashma that it's the same din of misnabed eitzim. It also appears of the language that the Sefta uses that this is actually the same, because it says ma rose man eitzim hakohanim v'om limones. Over there, he said, why are we counting these days, the times of the Atzik Kahanim on limones, when everybody can do it anytime? So it means that this is the same korban that anybody can do anytime. That's the question that the Sefta. The Rebbe explains the parenthesis. What did the Sefta ask? He's asking, why did the Chacham have to designate 9 periods in which the wood of the Kahanim, when this is a regular, anybody who wants could be a donation? What is those days? So you see that this is mashma from the Sefta. It's the same korban. But the shaila is what's the question of the Sefta? Since they just eitzim is a zach, it's something which applies to every individual. So why is this korban eitzim from the 9 families always getelled by from Yuchad? So this seems from the Sefta that it's the same inyan. So, but if we're saying that it is the same inyan, how could you bring it partnership when we say that a korban yochid cannot be brought b'shutfas? This is a regular korban. A korban mincha cannot be b'shutfas, just like the Teres Kahanim says by us, the quote in the beginning. And if you're going to say according to the Rabbanon, because according to Rebbe, as we'll see soon, but according to Rebbe, according to the Rabbanon, we're going to say these are 2 separate things. We'll talk about Rebbe in a minute. What is the raya? So why are we bringing up proof? That eitzim is called a korban, that a korban. So how do we know from there you can bring eitzim as a korban? Over there the eitzim weren't a korban. Over there the eitzim were part of the marocha. So either way, if it's the same, if over there the 9 families that had these special times was a korban, how could they bring it in partnership? If it's a different time, it's not a korban, how do you know that that eitzim could be brought b'chal a korban? What is the source of that? And the Rebbe further says, even according to Rebbe also doesn't disagree that we learn from the korban eitzim. It's just, the Rebbe says korban needs hagosha and melach, the eitzim. The Chacham say no, but also Rebbe would need the pasuk. How do we know that eitzim is b'chal korban? So he too has the same problem. But what is, the Rebbe asked, what is the logical difference? Why, according to Rebbe, the korban has to have hagosha and melach and the other details, and according to Rabbanon not? Further, we also need explanation. What is the tama machlokes for Rebbe and the Rabbanon? What's the reason for the disagreement from Rebbe and the Rabbanon? The Bepashtus simply is side Rabbanon, side Rebbe. Both of them learned us arois from korban mincha. They both learned this from korban mincha. Since the Torah says that a yochid can bring a korban, says an extra wood korban brings a korban, it means that he can also bring eitzim. How eitzim? Also, Rebbe relies on the pasuk because otherwise, who says that eitzim is a korban? Was from them pasuk dafke veismen as eitzim and from korban. That's the pasuk that tells us the eitzim has a korban. So we can use our pasuk, v'nefesh kisakriv korban, that a nefesh can bring a korban, because we have another pasuk that says eitzim are a korban. So that's two also relying on that pasuk. So then when you say you can bring a korban mincha, you can include the korban eitzim, because that's also a korban, because the Torah adds the word korban. So why, according to Rebbe, you need Hagosha, you need Melech, you need the other things that the Amoraim add later on. And according to the Rabbanu, you just bring a korban eitzim. What's going on over here? And the Rebbe will explain, Taka, this will be the key to the explanation. Later on, the reasoning explaining the key of Machlekes from Rebbe and the Rabbanon and the parts of what exactly is the korban from the 9 families that they brought, as we'll see later on in the sicha. But first, the Rebbe is going to negate another answer that is given by some Mefarshim, that we cannot answer that. The Rebbe is going to discuss it in Ois Gimel. In order to answer the question, how could they bring a korban, the eitzim, b'shutzvus, in partnership, the 9 families that the Gemara Tainis talks about? So some Mefarshim are coming up and saying that this, that we said that you're not allowed to bring a korban eitzim in partnership, is not according to all opinions. Some opinions, it's only if we learn it from the pasuk korban that we say that you can't bring it in partnership. And therefore, others learn it from the pasuk kol ha'ezrach, and therefore it can actually be in partnership, so it's not a problem. So the Gemara in Tainis that says that you could bring a korban in partnership, the families, they'll have to follow the view that you could bring a korban in partnership. That just like we say that and that's why it'll be okay to bring eitzim in partnership. And according to the other man, the Omar, then it doesn't go like that. But the Rebbe said, but it says in the pasuk korban eitzim. How are we gonna? Okay, yain and shemen, you want to argue whether you can bring it in partnership or not, because it depends on which pasuk you learn it. That's okay. But korban eitzim comes from the pasuk in which it says that we brought a korban eitzim. So it says a pasuk. So the Manda Omar that says that you can't bring has to figure out. So how did they bring the korban eitzim in pashtus? And number 2, the Rebbe says this whole possibility that we learn it from another pasuk is only according to Rebbe. And according to Rebbe, you cannot bring in partnership because it's a regular korban. And just like a regular korban mincha cannot be brought in a partnership, you can't bring that in partnership either. Let's look inside. Api Hanal is move on. Based on the above, it's understood as mekenit far entfer kushya Hanal sifalov. You can't answer the above question that we brought in sifalov. Alpidem, based on this, was meforshim len and ein, the meforshim interpret. Ados was nidvas eitzim ken nit kumen b'shutfus. When we said that the gift of wood that you bring cannot be brought in partnership, we brought it down from the Teres Kahanim before, right at the beginning of the sicha. So when do we say that it cannot come b'shutfus? Is nor loy the Manda Omar, that it only is according to the opinion was halt, who's of the opinion as der din von misnadvin levoina yayin shemen ve'etzim, that this halacha that you could give levoina yayin shemen ve'etzim, let it up from korban. V'shtei by milcha. Since we learned it up from the extra wood korban, which is by mincha, So that's why the Torah Kohanim said before. It's just like a mincha cannot bring brought in partnership, so you can't bring the in partnership also. Can bring the wood in partnership, and that's why. That's the reason why he says you can't bring it. But according to the other opinion, just as he said, just like two can bring the mincha nedava, you can't bring it in partnership because it's all connected to korban mincha, to the mincha. But according to the view who derives as miken menader zayin yain v'shemen, he knows that you can bring yain v'shemen not from the pasuk korban mincha, but from pasuk Ezrach, which states pasuk Ezrach, which is stated by Nisachim over there. Zayin is nit gleich zu mincha, so then they are not equal to mincha. You can bring them in partnership. Okay, so if you want to argue that there is an opinion that says that yain and shemen can be brought in partnership, the Rebbe says fine, because we don't learn them from this pasuk. But the Rebbe says, but the eitzim inevitably has to fit. So therefore, you can bring them in partnership, and therefore you're going to say, according to this idea, you're going to say that you can bring eitzim in partnership too, and therefore you're going to say that what the Mishnah talks about in Tainis, that they brought it in partnership, goes according to that view that we learned out from Ezra. And Take, according to the other Mandama, they could not bring it in partnership. It doesn't fit like the other Mandama, you're going to have to say. But the problem is, we have a pasuk over here that says that they brought in partnership. So whether you learn it from Korban, you learn it from Ezra, the Mandama that learns it from Korban still has to explain. It says over there, if we learn it from Korban, Mincha, over there we says that you don't bring it in, you can't bring it as a partnership because it's like a mincha. And the pasuk says they brought a korban eitzim in partnership. If you're trying to answer the Mishnah, the Gemara, and saying that goes according to one man, the Omar, that says that you can bring in a partnership, that you don't learn it from the pasuk of korban mincha, but you learn it from Ezrach, and the other man, the Mishnah doesn't go like him. You can do that, but you can't do that with a pasuk. The pasuk has to fit according to everybody. So the Rebbe said, "Doch nicht verantwortet the kusha now. Honicha yain v'shemen. Yain and shemen, you can say either partnership or not. Aber Aleph, number one, the pasuk v'agorolos ipalma korban eitzim v'goymer. That's a pasuk. It's not a pasuk, was darf stimmen. This pasuk needs to make sense. It has to fit with all the days, according to all opinion. Also to the Teres Kahanim that learns from the pasuk of Korban that we quoted, and you cannot bring eitzim b'shutfus. How's he going to interpret the pasuk? Which means they brought it all together. The families brought it together. And number two, base. According to the Rabbanon, we see in the Gemara, we only learn it from the pasuk Korban, so this has to fit. We have to say according to Rebbe, there's a svara, but according to the Rabbanon, the halacha. So we're not going to say that everything is the Gemara, the Mishnah, everything is according to Rebbe against halacha. It has to be fitting with the halacha is that we learn it from Korban, and therefore you cannot be makrib. So how will they makrib over there? The 9 families. Base those was in the Gemara is the Asvara. This that we have an idea as misnadvin shemen vert opgelernt loit ein man the Omar von Ezra. This that you can give oil So according to one Madama, we learned it from Ezrach, which is written by Nesachim. That means that everybody has a right to bring oil. Is das Davkele das Rebbe? That's only according to the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe holds that it's a regular korban. The Gemara over there, it's obvious to everybody as we learn the sof from korban micha. Okay, so according to Rebbe, who holds that you have that this is a regular korban that you have to give, that's Rebbe, can man doch nicht bringen dem korban eitzim b'shutzes. According to Rebbe, you cannot bring a korban of eitzim in partnership. So even if you want to say you learn from Ezra, but eitzim you cannot bring in partnership. You bald as a hob the different korban mincha. They have eitzim have a dinner korban mincha. It says the hagosha and everything else that you need. So we know that eitzim have a din of a korban mincha. Was the river is to uni melech or to nagosha. That's what you need melech hagosha. Unkemitza. From back korban mincha. So for sure, according to Rebbe, eitzim have to, we learn out from korban, or it has the same din as a korban mincha. Eitzim have to come from a korban mincha because they are, Rebbe says clearly that they are a korban mincha. So according to the Rabbanon, B'chlal, we learn from the pasuk of korban. To begin with, we learn from the pasuk of korban. And according to Rebbe, also we can't bring. So since according to the Rabbanon we learn from korban, you can't bring it b'shutzvus. According to Rebbe, it also has a din of a korban mincha. That's why it has all the details. So according to Rebbe and the Rabbanon, a korban eitzim is not brought b'shutzvus. Question is, how was the korban from the families brought b'shutzvus? The Rebbe explained this. In Asboris hatoichem korban eitzim b'sechet tainis givit makama days. To explain the idea of the korban eitzim, we find many opinions what that korban eitzim was. What exactly? Actually, according to the Pirush Mishnah, the Rambam, it seems like the eitzim were brought to the Marocha, but there was another korban. A korban nanoila was brought separately. It was a korban that came together with the eitzim. In Pirush Mishnah, Zog the Rambam, in this commentary, Mishnah the Rambam says, as in the Tog was the Mishpochas gebracht eitzim leisha Marocha. On that day that they brought the wood for the fire of the Marocha, they would bring a separate korban nedava. That's the korban eitzim. And the time of the period they said it was written in Ezra on the korban that they brought in those days. More specifically, is it in Sefer Hayad? Zog the Rambam. What is the korban of eitzim? There was a set time for families and families, to go out to the forests, to bring wood for the arrangement. And a day that this family it reached that they brought the wood, they would bring an oil of an adava. That was the korban of the eitzim. That was the Yom Tov Asurim Be'Behes with the tinies. You're not allowed to eulogize, you can't fast. Basi is Malacha and doing Malacha. So this was a tradition. Das haste, which means as korban eitzim not a korban fun eitzim. That the korban eitzim does mean a korban that's brought out of wood. It's not the wood was the korban. Not as in Zman was gebracht the eitzim Marocha. At the time that they brought the wood from Marocha, they gebracht oilus nedava. They brought oilus nedava. When the oilus were non-gerufen korban eitzim, that's what's called the korban eitzim. Der Korban von Eilus Nedova was man gebracht. The Korban of the Eilus Nedova that you brought, Yom Havos Eitzim, to leave the Eitzim that you brought in because of this wood. So it's totally a different, it's not a Korban Eitzim, it's a Korban Oila that was brought with Eitzim. The Ritvo is Masvir, the Ritvo explains. Shahoyu Mevadim b'mizbech b'fnei atzmei min ha'eitzim shenisrabu shenisnadbu. That means that they brought a whole bunch of wood for the arrangement, for the burning of the mizbeach, but they would make a special fire from the additional extra wood, so they made a special fire. That was the korban eitzim. Also the Chacham say, Sheshnei Gizrim hoyu krevim im tovit shel bein harbayim. They say that there were two logs that were brought together with the tamid of the afternoon. And this proves ki korban eitzim mamash, that's actually a korban eitzim, because the Gemara says over there when they brought, what was the nadav of eitzim, was this shnei gizrim. So we see there was actually a korban from the wood itself. As the eitzim alein at makar given als korban, that the eitzim itself was brought as a korban. So now we have the two ideas, whether it was a korban that was brought together with the eitzim, or it was a korban from the eitzim, the extra, the surplus of the eitzim that was there, was used as a korban. Rashi is mafarish in the Mishnah. Rashi in the Mishnah explains, as in the Tog was the Kahanim Ba'om, Misnad Havi eitzim, the day that they would gift to bring wood, and they would bring a korban at that day. It's very similar to the Rambam. Even there's a lot of wood. They would bring it during these 9 days. But Rashi also says they would bring a korban. From Pirush Rashi is mashma l'chayra. From Rashi's commentary seems v'tas Rambam in them, as the view of the Rambam. As need the eitzim zane given their korban, not the eitzim with the korban. Normat makriv given abazum der korban in zusammenhang with the eitzim, but you brought another korban together with the eitzim. As Rashi explains elsewhere, quote, that mishpachas shel Yisrael shekavu lem yomim b'chol shana lavi eitzim lemigdosh, that families of the Yid that had set days every year to bring wood for the migdosh, l'tzorech hamarocha, for the need of the arrangement of the fire mizbeach, mevim korban eitzim imohen. So they brought along a korban eitzim. They called it a korban with them. So this is a separate korban, not the korban from the eitzim. They brought a korban eitzim with them. Rashi doesn't say. Rashi doesn't mefarish. Wie das tut der Rambam? Was für a korban damals gebracht? Doesn't say what kind of korban you brought. Did you bring with it another korban? Rashi doesn't say. So that one versteht. So we don't need to understand over here. Aleph. The das Rambam or das Rashi. We have all of a sudden we're talking about an additional thing that we don't know. From one investment as korban eitzim meint nit kipshutay, but a korban to leave the eitzim. How do we know when it says korban eitzim? It means a korban for the gift of the eitzim, not that the eitzim is over a korban. Megifindoch as the eitzim lemarocha were non-gerufun korban. We do find that the wood of the marocha are called a korban. Why can't we say that the korban is the eitzim marocha? The Rambam lines up to mefarish. So why? How do we know b'chlal there's additional korbanos here? Base. Leidach Yisrael, on the other hand, that's what it was. As the Ali eitzim lanes and given a korban in mizbeach, he says that the wood itself was a korban in mizbeach. So the chiyun, it says something we don't understand. The state of mefarish, as the eitzim hat men gebracht. Why was the purpose that brought the eitzim? They didn't find wood in the storage where there was wood, so they brought their wood. Why all of a sudden do we get a korban eitzim? Why don't we get the regular eitzim? That's what they gifted. Kachis Nevim, it says the Nevim condition. Shebeneim, Chulu, is about as the Siba for the Nidus Eitzim is given. Since the reason why they brought the Eitzim was his need given can Eitzim Marocha, there was no wood for the arrangement. So we have to say their own gift was also to bring wood for the Marocha. Why all of a sudden is there a korban eitzim edition? On the Rambam, we don't understand. Rashi, we don't understand. Where do we get the extra? But according also to the Ritva, we don't understand why we bring eitzim as a korban, not bringing just the wood, what they needed over there. Why is there the extra wood for korbans? Again, we really have to understand that that's Rashi. So what was the korban that they brought on the Mizbeach? So the Rebbe explains like this, that, hey, the Bir was explanation of this. The Das Rabbanon, according to the Rabbanon, was learning up from korban. We say you bring eitzim. We learn off the word korban. And since it says a person can bring a korban, means he can bring also eitzim, which are korban. So we find two views in the definition, the law and the definition of eitzim. Rabbeinu Gershom says, the Kosovar Tanakamo, the Oison Gezirim, that's the Chachomim, Tanakama the Rabbanon, they hold the Oison Gezirim, Krevim Lehechsher HaKorbanes Ala Marocha. That those woods are brought to prepare as a Hechsher for the Korbanes on the Marocha. So that they will burn and prepare the korbanos. Also, the Pirish Mishnah is mashma with fi shachrochi lovi b'chol yom shnei gzirim nesofim al hamizbech leipachos mikachulu. So there is a need. You have to bring additional. He calls them additional to the mizbech, additional to the arrangement. The Rabbi overhalt. So basically, the gifts of the woods that we learned from the pasuk over here that you brought, so far we're saying that is still part of the arrangement. But the Rabbi overhalt, the Rabbi's view is, as the das rabbanon not when the eitzim makriv gem b'fnei atzmo, that this shnei gizrei eitzim that the people gifted, the gift of the Shnei Gizim that the people brought, was a separate burning that was burned by themselves. So either way, the Rebbe says, this is all the korban, the gift of the eitzim that we brought, that we're saying the korban, and basically, as the Gemara said, these are the two extra logs that they had to bring every day. Those were gifted, that people gifted. So the question becomes, were they additional to the regular arrangement, or they burnt them separately? But either way, the Rebbe says, even according to the Ravid, that they used them separately, Musman Zog, we have to say, as the Eitzim Zainen, Lefi Das Rabbanon, Nitke Korban Gomor, Das Rebbe. We have to say they're not a regular Korban, as according to Rebbe. Rebbe says that you have to bring that it has Hagosha and Melach, etc. But the Rabbanon don't hold that, so it's not a regular korban. Even if we should say that they burned them separately. So the Rebbe wants to establish over here that the whole korban eitzim over here is not, according to Rebbe, is not, even according to the Ravid, is not a regular, just a regular korban. V'yesh leimar, as in der Machloikis zwischen Rebbe and the Rabbanon gains in the Shitosayim. In this machlokes over here, whether it's a full korban or it's not a full korban, there is a following according to their view. In the machlokes for Rabbi Bar Plukte that we find in many places, many areas where there's a machlokes for Rabbi and those who disagree with him. Befrat mit Rabban, especially when he disagrees with Rabban. Aloshin in their Torah or in Divrei Chazal, when you see there's a language in the Torah or in the words of our sages of blessed memory, al derech zeh b'loshin b'nei Adam, or by humans, people when they talk it will come on. So what is the machlokes? See this word geteicht kedavke aleph kipshute mamash. Does it mean literally actually? Number one, so that's number one. It means very literal. Basically, b'chol has to be literal in all details. Or those can mean and not a tail. Maybe it means just part of it. It doesn't have to mean all the details. Or there ain't practical, even mean one detail. But in our case, the Das Rebbe, according to Rebbe, Bald Meleden Top from Korban Mincha. Since we learned out from Korban Mincha as Eitzim, Mikra Korban, Torah calls the Korban Mincha that Eitzim are called a Korban, Umisnadin Eitzim, that we can bring Eitzim. Ubefrat as Mikifit that Posik. Korban Eitzim is quoted from before. We find the language constantly used as Korban Eitzim. We find it here, there. We find the level, we find the word Korban. Korban Mincha. And we say that Eitzim is Mikra Korban, they're called a Korban. From the Pasuk. Misnadin Eitzim. Zok Mekipshute, as the Eitzim and Lein Zayin Korban. So then we say that they're a Korban. And as haben them din Korban B'chol HaProt, they have the din of Korban all details. And the Rebbe learned Rabbi, therefore Rabbi learns as the Eitzim, Dafen haben Melech, HaKosh, HaKosh, the Nitzol, bring close, all the Protim, the Korban Mincha, all the details as a Korban Mincha. Kipshute, literally. Loi di Rabbonon over, however, according to the Rabbonon, Hagam as we learn Takop, Korban Melamed Shivs Nad Eitzim. It teaches us that you can bring Eitzim. Und the Pasuk ruft sie on Korban Eitzim. Pasuk refers to them as Korban Eitzim. This does not necessitate this great novelty as Eitzim zijn not Korban B'chol HaProt, but they should become a Korban in all details. Nor Dayoi, it's sufficient to Mechadish sein to come up here with this Chiddush as if morgen ein Prat von a Korban. They have one part of a Korban. They werden verbrennt auf dem Mizbeach via Korban, either because they are burnt on the Mizbeach as a Korban, or the Ladas HaRayvet. In other words, as if they're Shnei Gzorim, they're also bought as a korban, but they're part of the maracha. Or the Ladas HaRayvet, they get themselves. That is sufficient to make them a korban, but not in the other details. Oh. So we also understand for our case over here what's going on with the korban of the families. In our case, with the families. Since the Rambam Pascal the Rabbanon, that it's not a full korban, literally. It's just brought in the Mizbeach. Is afila mizolzogen as the Eitzim Alein bringt men auf Mizbeach. Even if we should say it's like separately Kedas HaRayvet, that you took the logs and you did them separately on the Mizbeach. But since they're, after all, not a regular complete korban, like the people of the Rabbanon, is it mistaber as to leave them so their tog zayin kima yomtiv? Doesn't not logical that this day should become a yomtiv. Basurim bevesed time should be prohibited hesed and time. You didn't bring really a korban. So why would you not allow to use it? There's no korban over there. You brought Eitzim, but Eitzim is not a korban really, at the end of the day, according to the Rabban. Befrat noch, especially As we says mashma haldo the Rambam. The Rambam's view is as those was misnadim eitzim meant nor lemarocha. And what it means misnadim eitzim means only to the marocha. Not that there's extra wood that we bring separate korban. The Rambam we quoted before, he holds that it's just for the arrangements. It's part of the fire. And that is enough to call them a korban. So there wasn't even a special burning of the logs of the gzirim on a separate fire. They were just part of the marocha. So for sure, it's difficult to imagine, to say, as the nidvas eitzim marocha, that the gift of the wood that they gave for the marocha is those given their korban eitzim. That was the korban eitzim, special korban for the tes mishpochas, because that was done. That's regular by everybody. Everybody does these things. Brings fire for the marocha. This day should become like a yontiv, not to eulogize and fasting. These wood are just merely a preparational korban. At the end, we said before, you have to give them to the community before you put them on the fire. So how could we possibly say that that's why it's going to be like a yomtiv, so that you can't on these days, it has to be the tainus. Why? Because you bring some eights into the marocha, which is a pretty standard practice by Yechidim and all the time, by their mishpocha, this family. The liver learned the Rambam. That's what the Rambam learns. Of the Yom Shegilim ne mishpocha zula have eitzim. That in the day that they got to bring the eitzim, hey makriv melos nedava. So korban eitzim. That's the korban of the eitzim. Umay time hoyelek ma yomtov. That's why it was a yomtov. Asurim by behesved u'v'tayim v'sis malacha. Not because of the korban. It's the ilis nedava that they brought. Was I not korban gomer? That's a regular korban. That's what it means over here, that they brought. So why do we call it korban eitzim if it's a regular korban oila? These wood are not the korban. But Vibaldas, the Rambam Paskin, the Chacham, the Rebbe Canal, since he rules like the Chacham Rebbe, as me taich can taich in euch nit kipshute mamash, that we don't have to taich literally, because you're saying that korban, it doesn't mean it's really a korban. And then by korban eitzim, when we see the korban eitzim, meant this nit kipshute eitzim als korban, it doesn't mean eitzim al korban. No, listen to dovers kommen zusammen zu die eitzim. It means the dovers that come together because of the eitzim. So Memela, das Rambam is in Koshenik, was the test mishpachas of gebracht the eitzim b'shutfus. The wood they brought b'shutfus, that's not a problem. For the eitzim that doch given nor lemarocha, they were only for the arrangement for the fire. Und nicht gekorben. Und Memela kann man sie bringen, so that's what they can be brought in partnership. They can bring b'shutfus, euch b'shutfus. Und oilos nedava. Nedava kommen doch b'shutfus. We can't bring a mincha b'shutfus, a korban mincha. You can't bring b'shutfus, but the oilos nedava come in partnership. So that is why the Rambam learns that there had to be another korban there. Zayid Rashi Ober was his b'purusha chalashas hapashna. Rashi, who's in commentary, even at the Gemara, is literally nit kein paskin, not a codifier, not is a mefarish kipshute b'mikro b'shas. He also learns everything literally, both in the Chumash and in the Gemara. Korban Eitzim is not Eitzim leMarocha. It's not wood for the Marocha. Warum sie seien nicht kein Korban? That's not a Korban B'chal. Upshita nicht b'chol haprotim, and not in all the details. My time is erechnet lefarish. For the same reason, also as explained about Makri given Oilus and Dovokei Eitzabay. Why would he? Also because it doesn't sit because of the simple meaning. In addition, how do you know that? Is das nicht masim lepash the losh korban eitzim? Doesn't fit the losh korban eitzim. So, can't be for the marocha, and it can also not explain like the Rambam that it means some other korbanos. When the Rebbe Zokter bePirushay, therefore he says, "Be'ela hatez zmanim hoyu hakohanim v'homisnadmu l'hova eitzim," that the kohanim and the people volunteered to bring the eitzim. Hoyu makrivim korban oisa hayoim. They would bring a korban that day. V'afilo hoyu eitzim harbe l'marocha. Even if there was a lot of wood or the marocha, they would still give it. Hoyu elu misnadvim. They would gift it. Umakrivim ve'elu tishas zmanim. In these 9 times they would bring. Or they were zokt in the Rambam Mishnah. Shoy mishpacha shel Yisrael. The families of Israel shekavu lam yomim b'chol shana. They had set days lahavi eitzim lamigdosh to bring wood for the migdosh l'tzorech hamarocha for the marocha. Umevim korban eitzim imoim. They brought a korban eitzim with them. Was their fun gufa was their zokt as their makriv ben a korban. The fact that he says they brought a korban when he's not mefarish, was his gemender korban. What the korban was, yeshloimar, we can say as ledaitul v'pshutim shel kro b'Razal. According in Rashi's view and according to the simple meaning of the pasuk, b'Razal, is their korban given from the eitzim gufa. That the part of it was a korban. A chelik from the eitzim was a menader given, is given lemarocha, was for the fire. Unateil. And part of it they took as a actual korban. And so basically it was these 2 parts of it. There was the Atzeh Marocha, that was the main gift. And in addition, they brought a korban. And how do we know this? Because there needed to be some korban, because we called it a korban eitzim. So it's not a korban oila. And it has to be that the eitzim themselves were a korban over there. Move on the Hezbollah Ritva. We also understand the explanation of the Ritva. That they would make a separate fire from those wood that were added from the gifts. That was the korban eitzim. This proves that korban eitzim mamishu, that this is a korban eitzim. V'lo shal korbanos and not other korbanos that they brought in that day. The Rebbe asked before in the Ritva, why would they bring just extra, not the regular? How does that associate with the special thing that they did, that they brought korbanos for the marocha? So the Rebbe is saying that he wasn't negating, like Rashi, the Rebbe is going to learn. This is Masham Pashat Dvarim. They also brought it as it's said. He's only coming to say this was not a separate korban for the sugi korbanos that you do in the known categories of korbanos. For Natel, for the eitzim was a menatik for the mizbeach. A portion of this that they brought from the mizbeach, hot man, makrik v'na korban eitzim. He brought a korban eitzim. So now, this is Ritva's view coincides with Rashi. Like them is move on. And now we understand that that's Rashi for Ritva. According to Rashi and Ritva. As in the Tezmanim taken the Mishpachas Menate given the Eitzim in an open for Mishpacha Shutis. That in these 9 times, the families actually brought the wood in such a way it was a family partnership. And the reason they could have done that, they were just for the wood for the Marocha. But those was from the Eitzim genommen if Makriv sein, when they took to be Makriv als Korban Eitzim of Mizbeach, it does give a nit beofen shel shutfus, nor for jeden Yaakov and Atzmai. That was done for each one individually. Af shedoichek ktsas. This is a little bit difficult, but that's the way the Rebbe answers it. So according to the Rambam, it's pashut. It's a separate korban. The korban eitzim. So no problem. The korban eitzim is a regular oila. Oila can breed more in partnership. That's not a problem. According to the Ritva, according to Rashi, the main thrust, the main gift for the family's partnership was the wood. Then they took some of the wood and they separated it. The Rebbe says this is a little bit of a doichek, but that's what the Rebbe explains. And now, from here to the end of the sicha, the Rebbe is going to go further and explain many other places where we find that the Rebbe and those who argue with the Rebbe argue in the literal, or we can just, in all details, that it has to match, or we can do it partially, not exactly, and only partially. So the first example that the Rebbe will give now was from the Machlokes of Rebbe and the Chachamim about whether you can read the Shema in any language or it has to be Dafke in Lashon Kodesh. And the reason the Rebbe points out why, according to Rebbe, you have to read it exactly the way it's in the Torah, because that's literally, then it says that you read the Shema, you have to read it as it's written. However, according to the Rabbanan, no, you have to write, but you read the Shema, but every language would be fine, which fits with the idea that the Rebbe wants it to be more literal, like about us. It's a korban, it's a full korban. Versus the Chacham, it's okay that it's even in one detail, it's like a korban. Yes. We can say, as we mentioned earlier, as in the Machlokes from Rebbe with the Rabbanon, to korban eitzim, that this argument from Rebbe with the Rabbanon as far as the korban the eitzim gains a yeder l'shitosi become becomes b'shas. They both, each one of them, the Rebbe and the Rabbanon go according to their view in many places in the Shas. And the Rebbe is going to, first the Rebbe is going to start with Seder Zroim. That's the order, the Seder of Zroim. And then over there it's Masechta Brachos. So over there it says that Kriya Shema has to be, when you read the Shema, has to be Kichsova, as it is written in Lashon Kodesh. Divrei Rebbe, this is Rebbe's opinion. And the Chachamim say, B'chol Lashon, that you can read it in any language. Rebbe halt as the Chiyuv from Kriya Shema. Rebbe is of the view that the obligation of reading Shema darf sein genoi. It needs to be exact with alle pratim, with all details, wie the parashiyah stehen in the Torah, as these portions are written as they are stated in the Torah. It also has to be as it's written in the Hebrew, not just the content, but it has to be the way it's written. The Rabbanon halt nober. The Rabbanon, on the other hand, are of the view as is maspik b'chol loshen, that it's sufficient any language. You don't need it to be also as it was written. It is sufficient. The fact that the contents of what the subject is the reading of the Shema, that's sufficient. Now, the Rebbe says, although it seems like there is psukim, not that just this is the logic, but there is psukim to support Rebbe's opinion. Here we're trying to say it's just because this is Rebbe's view, but there's a pasuk that supports, that he uses to support. But the Rebbe is going to show from the Gemara that the only reason why we need the pasuk of to support the Rebbe's contention is because there is another pasuk. So to offset the other pasuk, we need this pasuk. But in essence, it remains that according to Rebbe, the first approach is that we have to do things exactly the way it's written. Let's look inside. Choch, as the Gemara is masbeh, the timing for Rebbe Rabbanon, although the Gemara explains the reasons from Rebbe and Rabbanon, my time by the Rebbe, what is Rebbe's reasons? The Gemara says, Omar Kara, because the Pasuk says, V'hoyu, they shall be. And the Gemara says, so they shall be means B'havi Yosun Yehu. We learn from this Pasuk that they must be in the way they are, which means in Lashon Kodesh. But we'll see. So that seems to be a pasuk to support that, not because this is Rebbe's view. The same thing with Rabbanon, my Tamai. What's the reason of the Rabbanon? Omakro, because the pasuk says Shema. Shema means listen. Listen means any way you hear b'chol loshin shata shemeya. If you're listening, because any language that you can hear, any way that you're saying it, you're still hearing it. So that's why the word Shema means every pasuk. Make any language. But the Rebbe says, these pesukim that the Rebbe and the Rabbanan are using is, as the Gemara explains, is only because we shouldn't learn from the other pesukim otherwise. But the essence, the Rebbe goes to Pashtus, that only specifically like Kiksava, and the Rabbanan hold that Choloshin. That's the. So while there's pesukim to support them, is over the Lishitose Hanal, but really it's that view that I mentioned before. What is the approach that we use, the literal or just a part of what says that has to fit? Is the Sibir Favos Rebbe Namton Davke Dem Drash V'hoyu. That is why Rebbe accepts specifically this expansion of the word V'hoyu, that it needs to be exactly. And the Rabbanon, the Drash, Pushma V'choloshin, and why the Rabbanon go for the Drash that it's made in language. And that's the reason why each one is using the drasha that they're using. We can also understand this idea is when the Gemara continues there. The Gemara says, shall we say that the Rabbi holds that the whole Torah was written in all other languages? Why? In every language. Since Rebbe has to have a special pasuk of a hoyu, that it needs to be specifically in Lashon Kodesh. So where we don't have a pasuk, that means it's in any language. These halkadaita Lashon Kodesh nemru. But if all other parts of Torah were written in Lashon Kodesh, and there is no pasuk, so v'hoyu dekosach man lamali. Why do we need the pasuk of a hoyu over here? The whole Torah was written in Lashon Kodesh. The Gemara answers. So, because there is a pasuk of Shema, that's what Rebbe argues. Because there's a pasuk of Shema, and since it says Shema, you may think that you can read the Shema in any language. So that's why Rebbe explains, I need the pasuk from V'hoyu, so that we don't go by Shema. But everywhere else in the Torah has to be Kichsava. But so in other words, the whole reason why we need the pasuk V'hoyu, so that we don't learn here Shema. So without the V'hoyu and the Shema, this still states that the whole Torah, it's always accepted that it has to be in the language that it said. It has to be literally like Kichsava. Same thing goes on the Rabbanon. The Meimra, the Gemara said, the Sova Rabbanon, the Chol HaTorah Kula B'Lashon HaKodesh Nemra. Why would the Rabbanon need? Shall we say that the Rabbanon hold that the whole Torah was said in Lashon Kodesh? Why would the Rabbanon need a special pasuk to say Shema, that you can do it in any language? That would mean that everything else has to be only said in Lashon Kodesh. And the Gemara says, because the E, why are we saying that? The E Salkadaitoch B'chol Lashon Nemra, if all the Torah is the Chol Lashon Nemra, Shema the Kosa Rachmana Lamali. So why did the Torah have to write Shema? And the Gemara says, Itzrich, over here, Everywhere is b'cholosh, but in that case, because you might think that you have to do it like Rabbi in Sava. That's what I have the Shema. Does say, so what does this mean? And that's svar is machriach, that the logic in of itself forces us like the Rabbi as kriya Shema dav zayin b'kichsova. That it has to be as it's written. That's the view of Rabbi. Unlike the Rabbanon b'cholosh. The limit from the psukim, why do we have these psukim? It's not based on the psukim; they're just to offset the other pasuk. Is not zu bavornen und shoyl sein the mashmos hofich ist von dem zweiten pasuk. Is just to offset and to negate the other way that it would seem from the other pasuk. Well, now we're going to bring an example. Moving on to the order of Moed, Seder Moed, which is in Masechta Sukkah over there. Rabbi says, "Kol Sukkah she'im arba amas al arba amas psula." If the Sukkah doesn't have 4 amas by 4 amas, it's not a kosher Sukkah. It's possible. It's qualified. You don't need 4 by 4. Even if it can only hold the head and the majority of the body of the person, it is already kosher. So in Torah state, how does it state in the Torah? The Torah says the sukkahs teishvus shivas yom, that you should dwell in the sukkah for 7 days. So the Gemara says, as is darvizai teishvu kein toduru, that you have to sit and you have to live as you live in your home. So halt Rabbi. So therefore, Rabbi's view is as the teishvu kein toduru. When it says you should sit like you live, the sukkah should be like your home. It has to be literally and in all details. Und therefore, the sukkah, that's what the sukkah needs to have. It has to have by four. Just like a home. A home needs 4 by 4. So that's why because Rebbe goes by the literal, by this face value with all the details. So we need it to be like a regular bayis, which the minimum is 4 by 4. The Chacham, however, are the view as Muslim zayin ke'ein toduru. It doesn't have to be exactly like you, kipshut, literally b'chol haprat and all the detail. But it says ke'ein toduru, similar to it. In that prat was his machzekes reish v'rubek. It's similar to the fact that it can contain and hold the head, the majority of the people. Adir asarai unas ken dorten zayin yeshiva. It's a temporary dwelling, and you can sit there. So that is enough. Qualifying for a sukkah, teishvu to do teishvu. So that is enough. That's called sitting. But we don't need the structure. You have to be able to sit there. But the structure of the sukkah is zayin came to duru. That should have the same as a regular structure. That we don't need. In Eis Yud, the Rebbe continues. We find it, the language and the opinion of people, also this, whether literal or not, in Seder Noshim, in the tractate in the order of Noshim. Omar Rebbe. So what does it say with it? Rebbe says, Kol ha'omer al menas. You say, I'm doing something on the condition is as if he said that it takes place right now, not when the condition will be fulfilled. And the Rabban disagree. We'll give you an example. If one says, for example, so the husband gives his wife a get, but he makes a condition. He says, Almanas. On the condition, this is your get, shetitnen li mosayim zuz. You're going to give me 200 zuz. Now the question is the divorce applicable now? She's divorced now, and the money she can give him later. So this is what Rabbi's opinion is. Is he like Rabbi Muguresh's ma'achshav? So she's divorced right away, and then she has to give the money. But according to Rabbanon, she's not divorced now. Only after she actually delivers the 200 zuz. What's the point here? Shitas Rebbe is, the view of Rebbe is, when you have a speech and you did something, you handed her a get, and you said, this is your get. He's doing this now. Although he's also adding now, saying on the condition of something which will take place later. So we take it literally in all the details. The ma'aseh, the action is accomplished right now. The divorce is now. Now there is ma'aseh v'amanas. He adds on the condition there's something more added to. But later on she should fulfill the act of the Tanai, what he made up with her. When the Rebbe zochter, and that's why Rebbe holds, as kol ha'omer amanas, if you said amanas, is punkt bevor gesagt, ma'achshav, as if I said from now. So the divorce takes place right now. The Rabbanon halten, but the Rabbanon are of the view, as mekenet mechadish sein, meishe sein ma'achshav. You cannot come up with a novelty and to add now. Chotz as bli hachidush, but the ma'aseh und the amira nit sein kipshuto. So it's not going to be literally, because he's not really divorcing her. He's not really saying she's not really divorced, because you have to wait for later on. So it means that it doesn't mean literally what he said, you're divorced and this is your get. So, but we can't come up with a chiddush that it is now, even though it's not going to be kipshuta. When the Rebbe Zoger said they get the schal shveter, and therefore their view is the get applies only later on when she's mekayim them tonight, when she fulfills the condition. And then the Rebbe brings down now in Oishid Aleph, Oder l'shitose from the Rebbe. When the Rabbana gefit man euch, we also find this by uplernen einigen von der zweiten Begzere Shava, when we learn one thing from another item and we use the rule of the Gzera Shava. This is in Seder Nezikin over there in Masechta Sanhedrin. Over there, what is the din if Hazid b'me'ilah? A person intentionally violates me'ilah. But Shogeg, you have to bring a korban, you have to bring back a chomish. But if you do it intentionally, so Rabbi says, over there you get Misa b'dei Shomayim. The Chachamim say, no, there's no Misa, there's Azhara. There's only a warning, there's a lav, but there's no Misa b'dei Shomayim. Like the Gemara, my time of the Rebbe. Why does the Rebbe holds that there is Misa b'dei Shomayim? That we learn, there's a Gzera Shava, the word chet by Me'ilah, the word chet by Truma. So Malahalam b'misa, Avkam b'misa. Just like by Truma. If you eat Truma Azar, is this Misa b'dei Shamayim? Also over here is Misa b'dei Shamayim. Rabbanan Amri, and the Rabbanan say, Amar Kro, no, there is an exemption. Over there it says, boy b'lei b'milah. That means only by Truma and not by Me'ilah. So we have an exclusion that by Me'ilah doesn't apply. So what's the difference between the Rebbe and the Rabbanan? Loit the Rebbe, v'balt der ganze din von Me'ilah by Hegdish. Wird abgelernt Gzera Shava von Truma. The whole halacha of Me'ilah by Hegdish is derived, we learn it out from Gzera Shava from Truma. So that on Emen, as the Torah made them limud the passion of Chol. So since there's a Gzera Shava, we should accept that the Torah means learning it literally and in all the details. That also with regards to Misa, just like by Truma there's Misa, so we have the Gzera Shava, there should be Misa b'dei Shamayim when it comes to Me'ilah. Masha'ekel das Rabbanon, as opposed to the view of the Rabbanon. We also learn from Truma the Kodesh Me'ilah b'Kodesh When the far is then at least there is a warning. There is a lav when there is mezid b'meila because of the Gzeir Shava. But they don't need the Gzeir Shava to call across the board. Is the limud b'Gzeir Shava lav davke kipshuta b'chol hapratim. This learning of the Gzeir Shava is not literally in all the details. Therefore, they are of the view, if you find a mute of boy, is man memayit hazid memila from misa, we will exclude mazid and meila from misa, and we'll use that boy that is the misa. But yet they still learn the Gzeir Shava, but the Gzeir Shava doesn't have to be across the board. So the Rebbe says in the Yeshid Beis, Abzei Shleimas that l'shitos anal for Rebbe. On the Rabbanon, that this l'shitose givit man euch in the machloikes wo nid der Rabbanon. It's not a plural, not the Rabbanon are in disagreement with him, nor a yochid. Is a bar plukta for Rebbe. One who's disagreeing is a single person, not the Rabbanon. So as the bar plukta for Rebbe gate lefishitis Rabbanon in the machloikes anal. That he disagrees with Rebbe because he will follow the view of the Rabbanon in the previous machlokes. In Seder Kochim, Masechta Menachos, Klei Shoresh She'oson Shel Eitz. If you made a serving vessel in the Beis Hamikdash out of wood, Rebbe Poisel, Rebbe says that's no good. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. So this is an individual, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. But we're going to say that he goes like the Rabbanon. So what's the machloikis between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef? So the Gemara said the machloikis is how we should darshan it. Rebbe dorish kloli uprati, the Rebbe Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda dorish riba miyut. There's two ways that we can expound. When we have first a general, all-encompassing verse, and then we have the details. Should we darshan the klal uprat, or we darshan it? We'll explain. Rebbe dorish klal uprat. So Rebbe learns a klal, and then we have a specific. The pasuk says vasisa menoiras. Make a lamp, a menorah. That's a klal. Make a menorah. It doesn't say from which metal or from which type. It just says make a menorah. Then the Torah says zohav toyer. That's already very specific. That the menorah needs to be made of toyer. So that's a klal uprat. And then the pasuk continues miksha te osa menorah. And again, it doesn't say menorah zohav. Over here it says it should be banged out one part, the menorah. So you have a klal, and then you have another klal. Menorahs is the klal, Zov Toyer is the prat. Klal uprat klal. You have a klal prat klal. The rule is iatadon elo ke'ena prat. Then you can only learn that it has to be exactly like the specific. Ma'aprat befurish shamateches, avkol shamateches. Just as the specific is metal, so while we're saying a klal that's keina prat, it has to be metal. Wood is no good; it has to be kol shamateches. It has to be a metal. So we see that the Rebbe uses the most restrictive fitting, that it has to be zohav, it has to be metal, more restrictive than the others. We'll see in a minute. But here the point is that according to Rebbe, it can only be made out of metal from this klal upratu klal, and it has to fit as close as possible to what the pasuk has said here, zohav toyer, not only zohav, because still there's a klal uprat, so it's keina prat, but at least it has to be at least metal. On the other hand, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Dorish, Ribuyu Me'ute. He goes, instead of saying a klal, he uses the rule that we including, and we're miuta, we are excluding. Bosisa menoiros, that's a riba. That's a any menorah. Zov toy to me, it says no. We're diminishing it a little bit. And then mixos menoirah chos v'riba. So by riba umiyat v'riba, where the Torah first was marbe, and then memayit, and then marbe again. Riba koil, then we include everything. So anything is included because the riba umiyat riba includes everything. You might riba. So what did we include? Komili. So then, but we still have the chomiyat, umay miyat shel cheres. We diminished of cheres. So what do we see? The das Rebbe was halt as a limud v'ribuy. Is was merkim shute. He holds that something we learn out is the more literal. When it was mer pratim gleich to the minion, that the more details as it's similar to the idea from welchem is marbe v'leim, from what we are learning it out and learning it is darish kol prati. That way, he learns darish kol prati. Was his marbe nor kera prat in the way of learning klalu prat, then you can only be kera prat doimim leprat. But Rabbi Yehuda was gave b'shittas Rabbanon the Rebbe. He goes to those who Rabbanon that argue Rebbe as even if there is only a similarity in one detail or similar to that, it has a connection. You can call it with the source. Kibi inyonenu, like in our case, korban ha'etzim. It's called the korban ha'etzim. It has to be. It can be called even though it's not really a korban. So, but there too, it's darish riba miyute, but riba komile. So he learns riba miyute. So he is marbe everything. Also that which is not similar to this specific. Nor shel cheres. And the only thing that he excludes is the one of cheres. This is considered the least important of any vessels. Even a king. Vasadam doesn't use it, so we exclude that from the kleshoris, not to use it for the Beis Hamikdash. So we have one more. I mean, Kochim, of course, that was the source, the Menachas that we were discussing, the Machlokes of Rebbe. But we have Taris, an Indian from Taris. So the din is Hanichnas la'aretz ha'amim b'sheidet tevim migdal. So we know the land of the nations, the Chacham were geyser Tuma. Also in the Avira of the Eretz Hamim. But if a person is enclosed, he travels in a Sheda Teva Migdal. Those are different enclosures. A box, a Migdal, or a Sheda, these are traveling encompassing him. Rabbi Metame. Rabbi says it's Metame. And Rabbi Yeshib, Rabbi Yehuda, Metayr. Again, this is Rabbi Yeshib, Yehuda is Metayr. The Gemara said, B'maykom Mefalgi, so what's the difference? What's the machlokes? Mar sober oil zoruk lav shmei oil. Rabbi holds if you have a tent which is in the ear, it's not on the ground, is not considered a oil. Mar sober oil zoruk shmei oil. But Rabbi Yeshua Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is an oil. The Das Rabbi, according to Rabbi's view, today an oil zol choytzit zayin, for an oil to provide a interruption so that you're not in the ear of the Eretz Ha'amim, b'fnei ha'tumah, dafür sein gleich zu an oil. It needs to be like a tent in all details. But it's not metaltal, it's not immovable. An oil sits. Then he has a din of oil, so if choytzit sein, a din oil, was is not metaltal, demult hat a din oil. then there is an oil. The kekel shit is Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. Hagam, does it need gleich b'chol ha'produs von oil, even though it's not in all details to oil. Baldover has this is gleich in them, but this is an amokim la'atzmi. But since it is similar that it's a place by itself, hotes hadim von oil, it has treated like an oil, and it interrupts it from the tumah. Ukushitas rabbonan hanal, as the rabbonan before the toher, and it's clean. The Rebbe ends the sicha with the word toher. This is Mesichas Chof Menachamov Tov Shin Lamed Beis.